We've added the code to allow us to create records in the controller. Now we want to be able to update records from the controller. You'll remember that like create, there are two standard Rails actions for updating. Edit displays the form, while update processes the form. And in fact, this two-step process of updating records is almost exactly like the process we just saw for creating them. There's only two key differences. The first is that we need to make sure that we have an ID. New and create didn't need an ID because there was no record in the database yet. But edit and update will require that there be an ID so we can find that existing record. Edit will use that existing record's values to pre-populate the form. The second difference is the way that the form processing takes place. Create used a combination of new and save. It created a new object and then it saved it. Update is going to find an existing object and then use update attributes to update its attributes. But other than that, the two processes are almost identical. Let's add them to our application. So here you can see that I still have subjects list up. And what I want is to be able to click an edit link for a subject, and I want to be able to pass its ID, the ID for this subject, to the edit action and then display a form for it. So let's start by doing that. Let's go to the list, and we know how to do that. We could just replace this placeholder with a hash that has the action that we want, and then edit, and then we need to pass in the ID. So the ID is going to be subject.id. That's the subject that we're looking at right now as we iterate through the set of subjects. So that's all we need to be able to get to our edit action. Now let's jump over to our controller and actually write our edit action. Let's jump down here, def edit. What do we need to do to be able to find a subject? Well, we actually saw that before when we were working with show, right? Just find the subject from params ID. That's all it takes. Now we have the subject, but instead of showing it, we're going to present it as a web form. Then we're going to need to render a template, which is going to be that form template. So we'll just save our controller. For the form template, I'm going to use new as a starting point. So I'm just going to copy everything that's there. I'm going to create a new one called edit.html.erb. And I'll just paste everything in there. So this is the new form. I just need a couple of changes. Here's a couple of cosmetic changes. I'll just change it so that it says update. And all of the fields and everything else that I'm using on the form are completely reusable with one exception, the action that it submits to. So now instead of submitting to create, I need to submit to update. But that's not enough. There's one more thing. We need to make sure that we also send along the ID as well, subject.id. So we're going to take the ID of the subject that we found and pass that along in the URL when we submit the form. And that way, update will also be able to get that ID. Otherwise, update will have access to all of these values, but it won't know what ID we're talking about, and it won't be able to find the subject to reference it. So it's a very important step. You always need to have that ID there. So let's save it, and let's jump back to our subjects controller now, and let's take a look at how we do the form processing. Once that form comes in, we're going to have update. Let me just jump down a little bit. And for the form processing, like I said, it's going to be very similar to create. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it in here as a starting point. Instead of instantiating a new object, I'm going to say find object using form parameters. Now when we want to find it, we know how to find it right here. We'll just copy that and paste it down here. So we'll do the same find based on the ID. Now we have the object, but instead of doing a new and save, instead we want to find and use update attributes and drop in that same hash to update attributes, and it will update it. That will update the object. And if the update succeeds, redirect to the list action. We could also redirect to the show action, but we need to make sure if we go to show that it has the ID available to it. So that'll redirect to show with the ID so we can actually look at it. If the save fails, we don't want to go to the new template. We want to go back to the edit template. Very important that we target the right template. Even though they're very similar, there's one important difference is that once we get to that template, it's going to resubmit back to edit again. We want to make sure we stick within this edit, update, edit form, update, and just keep going back and forth until the user finally is able to submit successfully. So let's put it all together and try it out now. Let's save that. Let's make sure our web server is launched. I'm inside the root of my Rails app, Rails server. There we go. I'll switch back to Firefox. I'll just reload this page so that we get the latest changes. Here we are. Now let's go to test subject and edit. There we are. We now see our edit page. All the values are pre-populated. And let's change something about the page. Position equals 7. Click update subject. It submits it to the update action. It processes it. It successfully updates the attributes. Now the position is 7, and it redirects us to the show action. Play around with it, get familiar with the flow, and when you're ready, let's move on to seeing how we can delete records.